In the autumn of 1974, the Cartwright family moved into number 42 Bleakmoor Lane, a large Victorian house on the edge of Birmingham. The building was tall and narrow, with cracked windows and ivy crawling up its bricks like veins. It had stood empty for years, but George Cartwright jumped at the price. "It's a bargain," he told his wife Margaret, smiling as if the deal had saved their lives. Margaret didn't say what she felt, that the house seemed to brood over the lane, as though it didn't want them there. Their children, 12-year-old Helen and 8-year-old Peter, ran through the house on the first day, their footsteps echoing across the high ceilings. On the top floor, Helen found a locked door at the far end of the landing. The brass knob was cold, almost icy. She rattled it, but it wouldn't budge. George dismissed it. "Probably nailed shut. Old houses like this, some rooms are unsafe." But Helen was convinced she heard something move behind it, a faint scraping, like furniture dragging across the floor. The neighbors watched the Cartwrights with an unease that Margaret noticed. No one offered to help, and no one welcomed them properly. A week later, an old woman named Mrs. Holloway came by with a tin of biscuits. She stayed only a few minutes, her eyes darting around the house. Before leaving, she whispers, "Best to keep the children away from the top landing." Margaret asked why, but the woman only muttered, "That house remembers things," and hurried out. Strange things began almost immediately. At night, Margaret heard whispers when she walked past the stairs, but the children were asleep. Doors closed with no wind. The kettle whistled even when the stove was cold. Once, the radio turned on by itself, filling the kitchen with static, and a low male voice seemed to speak through it. George yanked the plug from the wall, but the voice continued for a few seconds before fading. Helen became pale, distracted. She often stood outside the locked door, whispering as though someone inside were whispering back. Margaret caught her scribbling strange symbols in her school books, spirals and jagged crosses. When Margaret asked what they meant, in the weeks that followed, the Cartwrights' home changed from unsettling to dangerous. The locked door seemed to be the center of it all. Each night the noises grew bolder, footsteps pacing inside, scratching against the wood. Sometimes faint knocks answered when the family walked past. Helen was the most affected. She stopped eating properly, and her eyes looked sunken, distant. Margaret found her sitting on the landing late at night, whispering to the door as though someone inside was keeping her company. When asked what she was doing, Helen's reply was chilling. "He says I belong to him now." Peter, meanwhile, refused to sleep upstairs. He claimed he saw a tall, dark figure standing at the end of his bed. Once, Margaret discovered him hiding under the kitchen table, trembling, muttering over and over, "He doesn't want us here." Desperate, Margaret reached out to the local church. Father Keene, a young priest, visited the house one damp October evening. He listened as Margaret explained the whispers, the voices, and Helen's behavior. The moment he stepped onto the landing, he froze. "That door," he whispered. "It feels wrong." He sprinkled holy water along the upstairs hallway, murmuring prayers. Helen reacted violently. She screamed and clawed at her own arms, her voice suddenly not her own, deep, guttural, filled with rage. Father Keene pulled Margaret aside. "This isn't just a haunting. Something has taken hold of your daughter." The Cartwrights were no longer facing a house with bad memories. They were living with something demonic. The priest returned a week later to perform a cleansing. George insisted on being present, though his face betrayed his fear. The moment Father Keene began his prayers near the locked door, the house erupted. Lights flickered. The walls shook as if something pounded from the inside. Helen convulsed on the floor, shrieking in a voice that wasn't hers. "Leave me be!" "She's mine." Then, with a loud crack, the locked door burst open on its own. The room beyond was blackened, its walls scorched as though a fire had once gutted it. A foul stench poured out, and in the darkness a shape moved, tall, burned, its eyes glowing faintly. Father Keene raised his crucifix and shouted prayers, but the figure lunged, forcing the door shut again with a slam that rattled the whole house. When silence fell, Helen lay unconscious. She awoke hours later, weak but seemingly herself. The family fled the next morning, abandoning their belongings. Number 42 was left to rot once more. Neighbors say the house still stands on Bleakmoor Lane, windows dark, the upstairs door forever locked. And those who pass by at night swear they hear a faint dragging sound from within, as if something inside is still waiting. The Cartwrights left, but the house still waits, silent, patient, and hungry for whoever dares step inside. And if you enjoy true inspired horror stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to Fear Diaries, because there are darker cases still to come.